Andre always attracts a sellout crowd. You have to stop selling tickets. I'm going to introduce him now. Well, you'll learn a lot from him. I have just a little bit to talk about. His newest book, Dirty Love, is for sale out there. He will sign the books later. So, Andre Dubus III is the author of 5 books: The Cage Keeper and Other Stories, Blues Man, and the New York Times bestseller House of Sand and Fog, The Garden of Last Days, and his memoir, Tony, a number 4 New York Times bestseller and a New York Times Editor's Choice. It was named on many top non-fiction books of 2011 lists, including New York Times, Publishers Weekly, the Library Journal, Kirkus Reviews, and Esquire magazine. His work has been included in the Best American Essays of 1994 and the Best Spiritual Writing of 1999. And his novel, House of Sand and Fog, was a finalist for the National Book Award, a number 1 New York Times bestseller, and was made into an Academy Award-nominated film, starring Ben Kingsley and Jennifer Connelly. Mr. Dubus has been awarded the Guggenheim Fellowship, the National Magazine Award for Fiction, the Pushcart Prize, and he is a 2012 recipient of an American Academy of Arts and Letters Awards in Literature. His books are published in over 25 languages, and he teaches full-time at the University of Lowell. And he lives in Massachusetts, in our neighborhood somewhere, with his wife Fontaine, a modern dancer, and their 3 children. And he's going to talk about his new book, Dirty Love, and other things. And if there's anything you wanted to talk about, you can ask a question. Andre Dubus III.
Vodka, I'm kidding. How are you?
Good.
Nice to see you on this lovely Saturday morning. You say you always have a big crowd. Well, that's because this is my neck of the woods, and these are all my aunts and uncles. All right, so listen. So I did like a 40-city tour for Dirty Love, and I've read a lot from it. I'm okay with reading a few minutes from it if you like, but I've never read this essay that came out in a book called Knitting Yarns, Writers on Knitting. I'm serious. I submitted one. I got one in here. You know Anne Hood, the novelist and memoirs, beautiful writer. If you've not read Anne Hood, you're really in for a treat. But she asked a bunch of us writers. Well, she actually sent me a panicky email. Andre, I'm doing this anthology. I'm editing this anthology. And all these big, there's some great people in here, like 3 of you. Wrong glasses. You know, you hit 50, then you got to start getting the different kinds. So she's got, who does she have in here? She's got, you know, Sue Grafton and Barbara Kingsolver and Eleanor Lippman and Joyce Maynard and Elizabeth Searle and Anita Shreve and Jane Smiley, all these great writers. And she said, I don't have any guys. Tell me you knit. I said, you read my... I'm a boxer from Haverhill. In fact, I have knitted, yes. So can I read you this essay? Because I've never read it out loud, and it's really just about my girlfriend. It's really more about social class and my girlfriend in the 80s when we lived together in New York in Sinmel. It's not long, and then I'm happy to, let's just talk about wherever you want. Okay? Okay. Now I'm nervous because I've never read it out loud, and I'm not quite sure it's going to read well. We'll just see. It's called Blood Root Knit Pearl. It was December 1986, and I had less than 3 weeks to make my Aunt Jeannie a Christmas present. She was 8 years older than my mother, had lost her husband in her 40s, was done raising my 2 older cousins, Mickey and Eddie, and at 56 was going blind. She'd always been a large woman and lovely, with long graying hair she held back with silk scarves or pinned up with tortoiseshell combs. She preferred silver earrings and bracelets, wore minimal makeup, and had a much stronger Louisiana accent than my mother, who fled the Deep South when she eloped with my father in 1958. They ended up in New England, and their marriage lasted less than 10 years. That winter, I was 27 years old, living with my girlfriend on the Upper East Side of New York City in an 8 by 13 foot room. Seriously, 8 feet. And $1,500 a month in rent. And that was 1980. It had a kitchenette and a tiny bathroom. The ceiling high enough, I built a loft for us to sleep in. Beneath that was my desk, looking out the barred first floor window to 82nd Street. And every morning before going to work as a bartender down in the garment district, I would work on the novel I was writing. My girlfriend was 2 years younger and had found a job working in a bookstore on 2nd Avenue. She was kind, charming, and athletic, and she had also grown up rich while I'd grown up poor. This created a chasm between us we tried to pretend wasn't there. But daily, I was writing myself backwards into the ugly mill town I'd been raised in by my overworked and underpaid single mother, and at night, sharing a meal on the new sofa my girlfriend had bought us, wearing the Irish wool sweater and cowboy boots she bought me too, her 5-speed convertible parked in a garage not far away, her $2 million trust fund in a bank downtown, her sweet disposition and good skin and straight teeth, her perfect grammar from private schools, her family's 5 homes here and abroad, it would all become too much. I would accuse her of not knowing what the real world was really like. She would deny this, and I would start yelling. I would yell that she was from the land of yes, while the rest of us were from the land of no. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Yes, I fucking understand! She'd be crying, and I'd feel like a bully, for she'd always been loving and generous to me. If I could summon the nerve and the will, I'd apologize. But more times than not, I wouldn't, even though I knew I should. And because our apartment was so small, there was no place for either of us to retreat to except the mattress up in the loft or the new sofa below. That night in December, Christmas looming, I lay up there feeling small. How was it her fault she'd been born into wealth and privilege? How was it her problem that I saw the world as hard and unjust and anyone who did not was naive? Outside it was snowing. I could hear it ticking against the window glass, the taxi cabs and delivery trucks passing by in the street. Down on the sofa, my girlfriend flicked on the TV and picked up her knitting. Her knitting. It was another thing that made me feel far away from her. Who knitted but sweetly oblivious old ladies? To me, it seemed the busy work of people who were happy to watch life, not take part in it. But more than this, it was domestic art from before the freedoms of feminism. My girlfriend was 25 years old, her adult life just beginning. And here she sat with her legs curled under her, her eyes on the TV, her fingers working the needles in yarn without having to peek. She looked like some young wife and mother from 100 years ago. She looked to me like a woman who relied on her man to take care of everything. But there was something deeply comforting about this image of her. I did not know what it was, but I also could not deny it. Nor could I deny that I was drawn to that comfort. A few months earlier, my father had been run over by a car and crippled for the rest of his life. Every other weekend, I'd get time off at the bar. I'd take a bus up to Massachusetts to see him. He was no longer broad-chested and robust, his beard neatly trimmed, his cheeks pink. Instead, he was a one-legged man I didn't recognize. He lay in great pain on his living room couch, and his beard was long and bushy, his cheeks pale, his chest narrow, his arms withered. When I bent down to hug him, he smelled like old bandages and dead skin and dried blood. He was 50, but his third wife was pregnant with their second child, and their 5-year-old daughter, my half-sister, was running around the house nearly crazy with all these changes. And more changes were coming. Just weeks after her mother would give birth to her sister, they'd move away from my father, and he would be divorced for the 3rd time. As I watched my girlfriend knitting from up in the loft, I don't know if I was thinking about any of this, though it was probably the deeper root of my distance from her. Not some working-class outrage, but envy that she was the youngest of 5 children to a mother and father who clearly still loved one another and who would stay married the rest of their lives. I did not believe lasting love was possible. My girlfriend did. But I craved the warm solidity of family, something I was not conscious of until I was among my own. Not my mother and brother and 2 sisters, not during those years anyway, but the larger clan our parents came from down in the deep south. Fishville, Louisiana was no more than a break on Highway 8 in the pines of Grant Parish in the heart of the state. It was little more than 2 Texaco gas pumps in the gravel lot of a roller skating rink, and across the highway, a narrow 2-lane of cracked asphalt, lay Big Dean's Creek, a watering hole locals would swim in, the teenagers swinging off a tree rope into the warm, murky water, its banks slippery red clay. It was fed by streams running into it from woods where men fished and caught gar and crayfish and trapped loggerhead turtles. And a half-mile up the road lay the camp built by my mother's father. His name was Elmer Lamar Lowe, and like every one of my blood relatives on both sides of the family, he was raised in Louisiana. He was the son of a mule skinner and a rice farmer, and after the 3rd grade, he never went back to school. At age 9 and 10, he was working alongside his old man, tying thick rope to barge cleats, cinching it around the leather harnesses of mules who would then pull the loaded barges alongside the banks of shallow, muddy rivers and bayous. There'd be cottonmouths coiled in the trunks of cypresses and live oaks, Spanish moss hanging from their limbs my grandfather probably had to brush away from his young face. By age 16, he was the foreman for a gang of gandy dancers. Grown men laying miles of railroad tracks under the blistering Louisiana sun. By the time Elmer Lowe became the father of my mother and her older sister Jeannie, he'd established himself as a pipe fitter who helped build power plants and brought electricity throughout the South and Southwest. But this was a man I barely knew. Not until my parents' marriage ended and our mother, Elmer's youngest daughter, began what turned into the next decade of raising us 4 kids alone along the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border. Many of these houses were in tough, poor parts of town, and with my small body, my glasses, and long hair, I quickly became a target for cruel and angry boys, many of whom would grow into self-destructive men, just about all of whom are dead as I write this now. 1 to a stabbing, 2 to drug overdoses, another to cirrhosis of the liver, another to a car accident. That second summer after my parents' divorce, I spent a lot of time hiding inside our small, hot rented house. My younger brother and 2 sisters there too, and all we did was watch hours and hours of whatever was on TV. When our mother eloped with our father, Elmer told her, "If you get divorced, don't bother coming home." There's been no damn divorces in our family. But that was 10 years earlier. And maybe that summer she called or wrote her parents. Maybe she told them her kids needed something to do or somewhere to go, or that she wanted her mother and father to know her kids. I don't know. But soon we were speeding down the highway in a black Trans Am, a repo car my mother was being paid to drive to New Orleans, where we hopped a bus north to Fishville and what would become for me the place I'd grow to call home. It wasn't the camp itself. The outbuildings Elmer, we called him Pappy, had sided with riveted sheet metal. And it wasn't the 10 acres of tall jack pine or our grandmother Fern's chicken, sausage, and okra gumbo, or Big Dean's Creek or Pappy's pickup we got to ride in the bed of up and down Highway 8. It was being in one place where people you were actually related to had lived for many years. Since our parents' divorce in 1970, my sisters and brother and mother and I moved nearly once a year, sometimes more, from one cheap rented house or half house to another. Just as we seemed to settle into one, we packed up and moved to another. Friends were hard to come by. Then, just as I was about to enter high school, our mother found a large house to rent in Haverhill, Massachusetts, a half-dead mill town, and we lived there for 6 years. I eventually became friends with a boy from a big Irish Catholic family, nearly all of whom had raised their families there. On his father's side alone, my friend had 9 uncles and 9 aunts and dozens of cousins. Up the Merrimack River in Lowell, he had about as many from his mother's side. On Sundays, my new friend spent the afternoons at a relative's house, eating homemade dinners, throwing a football or baseball around with uncles and cousins, swimming in one of his aunt's backyard pools. For me and my siblings, Sunday was the day our father drove to our house and to take us to a movie or out to eat. Our mother home alone, the 6 of us, the only family we knew, every one of our blood relatives 2,000 miles away in Louisiana. But every summer, after that first trip in the repossessed Trans Am, our mother would drive us down during her 2-week vacations. Some years we drove other repo cars, once a VW van, a Chrysler sedan with air conditioning, a yellow Dodge Charger, that was my favorite. But as we got older and could help with the driving, we drove our old red Toyota, and we took turns driving straight through so we could skip having to pay for rooms at Howard Johnson's or the Holiday Inn. Then we 4 kids were all in our 20s with jobs of our own, and summers were hard to take off. Pappy and Fern's 50th wedding anniversary fell in January, and we threw them a big party, and it was good being in Louisiana in the winter. The frost on the pine needles, the bare magnolia branches scraping the camp during a cold wind, the scrap fire we burn outside and stand around while Pappy smoked a brisket over hickory coals in his cast iron smoker. Somebody, probably my mother, suggested we start coming down every Christmas. To save money for travel, there came the no presents rule. Too expensive, too hard to carry. Let's just each draw a name, one gift, and you can't buy it. You have to make it yourself. We still do this. One year I got a short blue candle poured in a mold for me by my cousin Mickey's 7-year-old son. The next year I got a case of Mayhaw jelly from Mickey himself. Another year, because he'd heard I'd started writing fiction, Mickey's older brother Eddie, a carpenter, sanded a 4-inch length of oak branch into which he drilled 2 holes to hold 2 pencils. I got that 30 years ago. I still use it. One Christmas, I drew my sister Suzanne's name and baked her sour cream enchiladas I then froze and wrapped and tied with a bow. The following Christmas, I drew my cousin Mickey's wife, Sue, and I bought wire and beads and bent her a pair of earrings. The year after that, I drew Pappy's name and didn't know what to make him, so cheated and bought him some cologne and 2 Louis L'Amour novels. Every year, at least one of us would cheat and go to a store and buy our one present we were supposed to make. That December night in 1986, I was tempted to do that for Jeannie, but I couldn't. I loved her too much. Whenever I saw her briefly during those summers or for a few days every Christmas, she seemed to see me, whoever the hell I was, even when she was going blind. She'd sit down and ask me questions about my life. Are you in love? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you drinking too much? Do you know how you're going to make a living and be an artist? 2 years earlier, I published my first short story in a magazine. She read it and called me on the phone. "Oh, Andre, I'm just so happy you're not squandering your youth." I felt loved by this woman, my mother's big sister, and I wanted to show her that I loved her too. Down below, just a few feet from my knitting girlfriend, TV men and women fought and made up or did other happy or melodramatic things I did not believe. But now I was looking closer at what was in my girlfriend's lap. It appeared to be a small blue blanket. "What are you knitting?" At first, she didn't answer. I asked her again, and she reached for the remote and muted the TV. "A sweater?" "Who for?" "My sister's new baby." Her second or third, I knew that, but I hadn't seen the obvious, that my young, rich girlfriend was somebody's aunt too. I may have told her that was nice of her. I hope I did, but maybe I didn't. The previous Christmas, Jeannie had drawn my name. With her fading eyes, she painted me a portrait of Pappy and his twin sister, Tootsie. It came from a black and white photograph taken in 1915 when they were 10 years old. They're both on a log in the woods. She's leaning on it in a dress, a bow in her hair, and Pappy, in knickers, is squatting on it and whittling a stick with a knife. Jeannie had this painting framed under glass, and when I unwrapped it, sitting on the couch beside her down in Fishville, she said she could hardly see it anymore, but she hoped I liked it. I hugged her and told her I did, though I more than liked it. Somehow she knew how much having family meant to me. Somehow she knew I needed tangible evidence of my own roots. And what Jeannie needed was something she didn't need to see to appreciate. She needed something she could touch. You think you could teach me to do that? My girlfriend's needles stopped clicking against one another. She looked up at me, her expression cautious but hopeful. If you really want to, I want to knit my aunt a scarf. In seconds, I was sitting on the couch beside my girlfriend, choosing a roll of gray yarn to work with because that's what she had the most of. She put aside her nephew's sweater and handed me 2 knitting needles. Number 10s, she'd said. They were a little heavier than I imagined they'd be. I liked how smooth they were, but holding them, I couldn't help feeling emasculated till I remembered Rosie Greer, that big football player, knitting on some TV talk show, and I felt better. But I also felt shallow and reactionary that I needed to feel better. My girlfriend showed me how to, quote-unquote, cast on. A process so complicated, I gave up and asked if she could do that part, then handed over to me once the actual knitting would begin. I watched as she rolled out the yarn and about 2 feet down tied a slip knot she cinched onto one of my needles. One more page, I didn't know it was this long, sorry. Then she took the other one, her thumb and index fingers working the yarn into loops and more knots. It was like watching a spider spin a web as naturally as breathing. And soon she was handing me both needles and telling me I should probably just knit Jeannie's scarf in a simple knit pearl pattern, whatever that meant. She placed both her hands lightly over mine. She showed me how to first make a knit stitch. These details are foggy now, but I remember pushing the point of my right needle into her slip knot and wrapping the yarn from the back to the front of the needle before pushing it back under another knot, which left the yarn somehow at the rear of my right needle. Then I was pulling my yarn to the front, sticking my needle under a new knot I'd made, then doing it all over again, looping from the back, sticking in the needle, looping from the front, and sticking, looping and sticking. My girlfriend went back to her own knitting, and she left the TV muted, and all I heard was the clicking of her needles and the much slower click and slide of my own, the snow blowing harder at our window, the street a muffled quiet. Every night after dinner, the 2 of us would sit on our couch in front of whatever was on TV, and we'd knit. After a few sittings, I had what was beginning to look like 5 or 6 inches of a real scarf. And while my girlfriend told me that this was a simple pattern, it looked wonderfully intricate to me. Its raised ribs and soft valleys precisely 1/4 inch apart. It made me think of snakeskins and Native Americans, and I felt joined to all the men and women across cultures down through the ages who'd done something useful with their hands, who'd made essential things from whatever was in front of them. And I was looking forward to wrapping it and giving it Christmas morning to my Aunt Jeannie down in Fishville, Louisiana. But this feeling of joyful anticipation rarely came while I was actually knitting, for the act itself was too calming for that. The constant sticking and looping and light cinching and more sticking and looping, my fingers moving in a rhythm they'd never known before. It required me to focus, and it allowed me to drift, too, the way running a long distance required my feet and legs to do one thing while my mind could do another. I recall thinking a lot about my father, his new life to be lived in a wheelchair. I thought of the novel I was writing, of how most days I was convinced it just was not working because I was still too angry about the childhood I was trying to capture. I thought of my mother, how she raised us as best she could, and now she was free of it all, living with her boyfriend on an island in the Caribbean, delivering food and liquor to restaurants and hotels. I thought of my brother and 2 sisters, Those years we huddled around the TV in our small rented houses, how I was looking forward to seeing them again. I thought of Jeannie going blind, this woman who loved sculpture and paintings and books so much. I pictured her pulling this homemade scarf from its box, the way she'd squint her eyes at it, run her fingers over it, maybe smell it before I leaned over and kissed her. And I thought of my considerate, privileged girlfriend knitting beside me, how we probably wouldn't make it. We wouldn't, but that I loved her anyway. I also wished her and her family well, rich or not. In the lamplight, her blonde hair down around her shoulders, her eyes on the TV while her needles clicked away, she looked content and beautiful. She turned and smiled at me. Except for meals and sex and drinking in bars, there was very little we'd ever done together. But now she'd helped me to create something I couldn't have without her. Between us on that sofa, her money had bought us with something warm and palpable and vaguely parental. I felt shy in the face of it. I smiled back and returned to my knitting, to my looping and sticking and cinching in snugly before looping again. For this had become the conversation between us, the clicking of our needles, this soft woolen truce. Thank you. About knitting. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was a little longer than I thought. So how are you? Maybe I'll just speak like, Pat, you said talk for 5 hours before. I'll just speak for like 5 minutes, and then let's have a conversation. But you know what? I love writing. I never intended on being a writer. I never wanted to be one. You know, it's funny. I think a lot of us end up doing things we never thought we'd do, and it's what we're supposed to do it. What I love about writing is I never know what the hell I'm doing. And you know, I teach writing at the university level, and I do conferences, and I talk to high schools, and I keep finding myself saying the same thing over and over again, which is, don't outline it, don't think it. And I quote the writer Richard Bauch, who said, if you think that you're thinking when you're writing, think again. He said you're much closer to the dreaming side of your mind, so just dream it through. He said then, of course, when you're done, kind of hang it on the wall the way a doctor looks at an x-ray, and try to be terribly smart about it. So that there is a second stage to the creation process, which is revision, which, as you know, of course, means to see again. But the reason I bring this up is when Ann Hood asked me to write an essay on knitting, and I had no time to do it anyway, something happened that I want to share with you, which is, I don't think we talk about enough. Something just kind of shifted in my belly just a little bit. And I knew there was something there with that knitting. But I'd forgotten all this stuff with my book. I remember she had taught me how to knit the scarf. I remember that I knitted a scarf for Aunt Jeannie. I don't know if I put in here, I didn't tie it off quite right. It lasted about 5 days before it started. I think I fixed it, but it didn't look so good. But she was blind, she didn't know. But you know, to me it's a beautiful thing that happens where it's so subconscious. If you look at the word intuition, right, we all have one. You know, I bought my mom a brand new truck when my book got Oprah-fied. That was a great moment to buy my single, low-income mother a brand new car. She picked out a candy red, double-cab Tacoma Toyota. Louisiana girl she is. I remember I walked into Ira Toyota. I was going right to this salesman, and within half a second, nope, not him. I'm going to go that one. Right? So the word intuition actually means to guard. To guard. Which I think is just a beautiful thing. And I think it's always at work in the creative process where there's some part of us that knows what's right and knows what's true, but we have to listen to it because it's a quiet voice. And I think we talk about this a lot in religious faith and when we talk about the divine and mysteries. And what I'm saying is, if you look at the word to remember, it's a beautiful word. The opposite of remember is not forget. Do you know what the opposite of remember is? Yeah, dismember. Chop, chop, chop. Remember means to put back together again. The truth is, my memory's not that great. If I see a movie tonight, next month, it's a new movie for me. My whole life's been like that. So how can you write a memoir or an essay about something that happened 25 years ago? The act of writing itself opens the panels back into your memory, back into your memory, back into your memory. And there's this wonderful feeling of putting it back together again. And I think that so much of reading and writing is about putting back together again. You know, there's a wonderful line from the writer Janet Burroway. She's a beautiful writer. She says that when and I'll end with this, let's have a conversation. She says that when we go to the book, when readers go to the book, be it a novel or a memoir or what have you, she said I'll pull back. A lot of us say we read for an escape, and I always argue with people who say that. I say, well, I noticed you're reading some pretty serious work there. I don't think you're escaping it. Truth is, if it's honest, whether it's comic or somber in tone, if it's literary art, it's going to take you deeper into human life, not away from it. But I know what people mean. What they mean is leave our own little life for a moment to go into someone else's life. And what Janet Burroway said, which I think is so poetic and beautiful, she said, what we readers really say to the book when we pick it up is, give me me. Isn't that beautiful? Give me me. All right, I'm going to do one more quote. This is from, my wife says, you know, honey, you have no wisdom of your own, just a Rolodex of other people. That's called attribution, honey. I hear people get up there quoting, yeah, they never say who actually said that. They say, that was Leo Tolstoy. Here's Leo Tolstoy, and then I'll shut up. Leo Tolstoy defined art this way. You can get a PhD in, you know, what, wrestling with that question of what art is. Tolstoy just said, art is transferring feeling from one heart to another. Isn't that beautiful? And there's only one thing that's going to do that, right? And that's truth. That's the only thing that's ever going to make anyone feel anything. We all know it when you feel like someone's faking it. But you know when it's not faked. And anyway, I love trying to get there. Thank you. Show me up. Ask me a question.
I have a question.
What's your name?
My name's Carol.
Hi, Carol. With an E or no E?
With an E.
I got the E5.
First, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your writing. I've been deeply moved by it, so I really appreciate your writing.
Oh, thank you so much.
And here's my question. How does having an audience, and particularly more recently, knowing that you have a large audience, how does that change your writing, or does it?
That's a really great question. It can be a problem for some, but it's not for me because I always forget I have an audience. I'm always surprised I show up anyone's there. Oh! Thank you. No, but you know, you do raise a really good point. You know, I had this. I had a lot of success with my third book. All right, people understandably think, you know, because I'm the son of the great short story writer, it probably was easier to publish. Oh no, I think it was harder. You know, I love Ernest Hemingway's work, and if all of a sudden I see across my desk a story by Ernest Hemingway III, say, excuse me, I got my own Hemingway, go sell cars or something. My first 3 books went to nearly 100 publishers before they found homes. And my third book, which was my second novel, which is about the 5th I'd written, was House of Sand and Fog, and as you know, it really took off, and then Oprah put her magic wand on it, and it really, really took off. And for the first time in my life, people were calling to, especially my agent, wondering what I was working on. When you make someone a few $1 million, they now are interested in what the hell you do with your pencil and notebook. And Carol, at the time, I was actually building my family home. And I was writing my next novel, but I was writing at night like I always did. And my point is, I can see where a lot of people would get paralyzed by this thought. People would ask me, don't you feel a lot of pressure to you know, have another hit book? I said, no, I really don't. And I think it's because it's a complex answer. Number one, I do think if there's any one enemy to human creativity or bouncing a basketball or making love for that matter, it's self-consciousness. And if you have one eye on the mirror to see how you're doing, like, am I writing something Oprah will like? Or, do I look sexy bouncing this ball? What's going to happen? Right? You're going to be out of it. You're not going to be doing this thing as wholly as it can be done by you, and you're certainly not going to hit that transcendent level you're looking for. So, a really big success can do a number on you if you care. So I wrote this memoir, Tony. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but basically, writing saved my life. I was a bully kid. I snapped. I became a fighter. For 10 years, all I did was fist fight. Don't get me wrong. I hated violence. I sure as hell didn't pick on anyone. I hated bullies. I hated cruelty. I go to a bar. I wait for some guy to hit his wife, and I put him in the hospital. I go to a party, I wait for some big guy to lord over someone smaller, and I put him in the hospital, or tried to. I got beat up a few times, I got arrested. The Haverhill police loved me, because I was wailing on guys they wanted to wail on, but they couldn't without losing their badges. And I got a lot of social rewards, and that memoir was all about that. But my point is, I knew, back to that little voice inside us all, I knew every time I left a fist fight, whether I'd done the right thing or not, whether I had cops patting me on the back for defending a woman in Miami airport once. And, but a little voice inside me always knew this is a bad road. First, I'm putting more ugliness in the world. I punch a white beater in the face, I'm going to make him less angry? No, now he's angrier. Violence does beget violence. And I also knew I was going to get killed. I'm not a tough guy. I was just crazy with self-hatred. I didn't care if I died. Or I was going to go to prison for killing someone. And so, as a way to try to control myself, this is a long answer, but it speaks right to your question. As a way to try to control myself, I started to box. I said, well, I'll box. You're supposed to, get punched in that sport, and then I won't be any more street things. And one night, I was living in Lynn, and it's so cool to be in a local audience because you know what I'm talking about. Lynn. See that in Kansas? They go, oh, that sounds like a nice thing. Maple syrup in school, high school houses. Oh, Lynn, the city of sin. Don't go off the way you would. You're from Lynn, forgive me. But I was living there, and I was training for the Golden Gloves with a guy named Tony Pavoni. It sounds really masculine. All it means is I signed up. I was going to go in fight and roll. And one night, dressed up after a day of construction, I was 22 years old. Instead of going to the gym to train, something made me down. It was deeply intuitive again. Something made me brew a cup of tea, sit down, get a piece of paper and a pencil, and I wrote a scene. And to this day, I do not know what pulled me to that, except something larger that's in all of us that makes me believe in the divine. I have a hard time believing in God, but I don't have a hard time believing in the divine, if that makes any sense. And so for me, Carol, writing saved my life. So that this publishing career and the best-selling stuff has been such a wonderful, happy accident. That's a phrase from Aunt Jean. Oh, that's a happy accident. So that I need to do it to be alive. The writer, Thomas Williams, was asked, why do you write? He says, oh, that's easy. I write so I don't die before I'm dead. So if you are fortunate enough to find any kind of work that you're doing at that level, really if the world notices or not, ultimately doesn't matter too much. And I'm very grateful for the success I've had, but I never think about it and I never take it to that room. Yeah, I feel fortunate.
I truly think it's your personality that has made you the successful author that you are. And my question is, do you ever write something and then look at it and say, did I actually do that because you thought it was so good?
Great question. Next question. We've met before, haven't we?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, hi, Doris. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I do bet you're wrong.
Now I forgot your question. You're saying, have you ever looked at it and said, wow, that's really good, I can't believe I wrote that? Never. No, seriously, never. Sometimes I'll hit a sentence.
I'm amazed.
You know what it is more? Go ahead. You were saying,
Because you just sort of, your thoughts just sort of seem to flow.
well, no, I revise like hell.
Really? You don't work over something and read it and say, oh, I should change this word or that?
That's what I do. I work over
You
it and
do?
change. Oh, that essay alone is going to revise 30
I'm
times.
absolutely amazed at that.
Good, because you want it to read as if you don't do that.
Yeah.
You know, there's a great line from, well, Hemingway said, writing is easy until you think you're the reader. The writer Paul Ingalls said, writing is rewriting what you've already rewritten. But even after all that, Doris, I have to be very honest. I always feel like, this is my new book, I always feel like, I'm sorry. I have a friend who's a really famous novelist, and he's got a new book coming out. He says, it's a great book, can't wait for it to come out. I said, you are kidding me. I said, I'm sure it is a great book, Mr. Pulitzer Prize winner, but do you really feel that way all the time? He said, well, on this one, I know it's a damn good book. I'm looking forward to it. I said, oh my God. I want to duck the Rotten Tomatoes every time the book comes out. Look, I always feel, got the Irish, great Irishman said it best. Ever tried, ever failed. Never mind. Try again. Fail better. So Irish. It's like a hug and a kick in the shins at the same time. 3/4 Irish.
So based on that, how do you know when it's done? How do you know when you're gonna just let it go?
What's your first name?
Betsy,
Hi,
I
Betsy.
met you in Florida.
We have it. Where in Florida?
Record.
Oh, that was fun.
Briefly, I saw you there. Briefly.
Nice to see you again.
Yes, nice to see you too.
You know, I do think this is where years of practicing something can help. I don't know who said this, it's a famous line, you've probably heard it too, but no work is ever done, is just ultimately abandoned. You know, Raymond Carver, the short story master, said, he said, the kind of care I like is when you're in the final stages of revision of a story, you take all the commas out, then you put them all right back where they were. You know when I know something's done, and again, there's always that lingering feeling of, next time I'll do better. Real quick, Pablo Picasso. Picasso was asked, Mr. Picasso, what's your favorite artwork of yours? He says, oh, that's easy, the next one. But for me, Betsy, you know when so I know there are a lot of parents in this room, you know when you come home and now they're in high school, you come home on a Friday and they're all at friends' houses for the weekend, and you're not quite sure, did I interrogate that guy? Don't they own guns over there? Doesn't that guy have a porn collection on the living room sofa? You know, you don't know what they're doing and who's in whose care they are, and you can't quite sleep right until they're back in the house. And to me, and you're always feeling them not in the house. You're always kind of, you know, you think you're watching a movie with your wife and sipping a glass of wine, everything's fine, but you're feeling them not in the house. And when I'm working on a novel or a short story, I always feel like my characters are my kids and they're not home. And I know I'm done when they're all back in the house. I just don't think about them anymore. So I feel like, okay, I can go to another house now. Yeah. It's not a good metaphor because I'm not leaving that house.
I wanted to ask you about your reading life, the very early years and the following that, up to now.
What's your first name?
Nancy.
Hi, Nancy. And she's not from around here. You sound like you're closer.
And not Louisiana.
Yeah, but you're in Mid-Atlantic. You're like Virginia, somewhere in the Mid-Atlantic South,
You're
right?
right.
Georgia, somewhere in there?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. Good. I'm sorry, what's your first name again?
Nancy.
Nancy, you know, the truth is, I was not much of a reader as a kid, and I'll tell you why. I had a house full of books. One of the things I discovered as I put back together my childhood and my immortality is that my family was a member of a social class we don't talk a lot about, which is we were a member of the educated working poor. So my parents were educated. My mother never made more than $10,000 a year. My father never made more than about $11,000 a year. So we had two incomes, but we really had one pair of pants for the winter kind of thing. It was first world poverty. We had electricity, but we didn't have much. But we had a house full of books, but I did not read them, and I'll tell you why. I would have if I lived somewhere else. The truth is, I lived in this kind of blue-collar neighborhood, and all my best friends are blue-collar kids, and you just get your ass kicked if you're caught with a book in your hand. It was not a masculine thing to do, so I just pretended I didn't like to read. Here's a story for you. I remember my sophomore year high school English teacher assigned a paper on Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. I didn't understand Leaves of Grass, but I sure liked reading it. I liked it. And I remember after she assigned it. I'm walking out. We all have our, long ponytails down to our waist and our leather jackets and our dingo boots. It's Vietnam's limping to his finish. And I'm walking out, and this kid who's now dead of cirrhosis of the liver says to me, like, you think I'm going to write a story by that homo? And I said something like, yeah, or something. And I'm thinking, I know. And I was up like 3 in the morning typing. Remember the old typewriters? With whiteout. Back in. And I stayed up all night writing that paper, and I handed it to the teacher, and I said, but I hit it. And, so I didn't read, and I think that's the main reason why, is I think if I lived in a different time, in a different street culture, where it was treasured, I would have happily sat on my porch reading a book. I started reading when I started writing about age 22. And I've been reading 2 to 3 books a week for the last 35 years. I read more poetry than anything, though. I read poetry every morning. Actually I didn't this morning because I'm going to write after our talk today, but I have probably 500 volumes of poetry in my cave where I write, and it's because I think poems, the poets, Faulkner said, back to the Rolodex. Faulkner said when the writer tries her hand at fiction, when the writer tries her hand at writing, she first attempts the poem. And when she fails at that, she tries the short story. And when she can't do that either, she ends up writing novels. Which is mainly what I write. And his point's really beautiful. In order for a poem to be great, every molecule of every letter, every word has to be just right. A great short story, every word's got to be right for it to be great. But we've all read great novels that could lose 300 pages, but they still are great. It's a very forgiving form. The Grapes of Wrath, my God. It's a masterpiece, but there are these horrible chapters in between the Job family voyage where Steinbeck goes on and on about his politics, and it's terrible, but it doesn't kill the book because the novel's a forgiving form. I want to recite you a poem. Because it's short and I can do it. It's so beautiful. It's by Ted Kooser, who was the Poet Laureate of the United States a few years ago. This is from his collection, Delights in Shadows, that won the Pulitzer Prize. It's called Starlight. Starlight. All night, this soft rain from the distant past. No wonder I sometimes waken as a small child. Isn't that beautiful? It's all poetry. Hi, sir. Yes, sir.
I've been reading Tammy, and I'm astounded that you survived your childhood. In view of the conflict that you were exposed to, but I guess you fought the good fight and survived, huh?
What's your first name, sir?
Ross.
Hey, Ross. I've got a good friend named Ross. Yeah, thank you. But one of the big demons, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room have written about your own lives, either in essay form or letters or even a memoir, is one of the big editorial demons is, so what? Oh, boo-hoo. Wham, wham, wham. Call the wambulance. Oh, you think that's bad? At least you weren't a lost boy in Sudan with a machete in your hand. At least you're not a Shiite in a Sunni neighborhood. But the truth is, Ross, I bring that up because while writing this, and writing about fistfights and being physically afraid every day as a kid of being beaten up just for having glasses or looking at someone the wrong way, I kept thinking about kids who get shot to death for wearing the wrong color bandana in the inner city now, and part of me was demoralized, thinking, well, this is not even close to the suffering, this is not even close to real danger. And then I had to kill that part of me because I do believe that every song is worth singing. And thank God for reading. If I had not read, have you guys read This Boy's Life by Tobias Wolff? Beautiful memoir. You guys need to read This Boy's Life. It was made into an okay movie with De Niro, and it was actually Leonardo DiCaprio's first role as a kid. But Tobias Wolff's a master short story writer. He published this memoir in the early 90s. Anyway, it is so beautifully done. And I remember reading it. It was nothing like my childhood, but it brought me to my childhood. Again, this notion from Janet Burroway, when the reader goes to the book, what we say in the book is, give me me. So that was my model, Ross, and that helped me. I realized, forget the Sudan, forget all the suffering and how yours is really nothing compared to what can be. You still have a song worth singing. And it's really not, one of the fears is, oh, this is solipsistic, no, it's not. If you go deeply and honestly and fairly into your own memory of your own putting it back together, it brings the reader to their lives. So it's ultimately, not selfish, which was my big fear. Anyway, I survived, not just because I got to be evasive and learn how to throw some punches and run fast, but it really was writing that got me off that path. It sounds like an Oprah show to say it that way, but it's true. Oh, the 21st century has shown up. Hi. I know you. Nice to see you again.
We've met in several similar arenas.
Nice.
My name is Faith. I wonder, you said that your close group are gone. The guys that you hung up are gone. But do you also bump into those that surrounded you, not in that close group, who have read and responded to what you have written?
Yeah. You hear about Townie? Oh, yeah. Well, there's my sister, right? Townie had come out in fall, I forget when, in 2011, and I was in the middle of the book tour, which is national, and I'm at home for the weekend. My sister Susanna walks in. She says, "Hey, honey, have you read this interview about Townie?" I said, "No, I don't read anything about it." Back to that self-consciousness thing, Carol. I never read any reviews. I never read anything about anything ever written about anything I write, ever. Google myself? Never. Because I'm sensitive. I get my feelings hurt too easily. I'm not going to do it. So she says, I said, "No, I don't read those things." She said, "Honey, you might want to read this one." So I read the character in Dubus is Townie vows revenge. I'm reading, and it's an interview on some literary blog, and the guy who's being interviewed, within the paragraph I know just who he is, and it's in a strip club. I don't know, like it might have been like Golden Banana or something, or Tens. It was local, and he's saying, "Yeah, I wrote about him in the book. In the book, he weighed 250 pounds. I weighed 160 pounds. We had a fist fight. He beat me almost to death. On top of me banging my head against the concrete in front of the bar. If the Halo police hadn't shown up, I think I probably would have died that night." And in the interview, he corroborates exactly what I wrote in the book. We went, "Oh, that's good." And all he said was, "And I'd like to do it again." 35 years later! But I have to say, I read it twice to really try to figure out what's he angry about. I gave him full credit for beating me up, and then I think, and this is really kind of poignant to me. The subtext of the whole interview was this guy Dubus, screw him, blah blah blah. I'm kind of celebrating that town. I'm on a mural in a building. I'm the Oprah boy, but here's the thing. What I got from that was what I have stories to tell. I've been in these bars for 35 years since I last beat that kid up. How come he gets to tell his story? What about my story? And I think that's actually poignant. And I think that's really why he wants to beat me up again. And I don't blame him. But I will not be going to those bars. Although I'm still in shape, Ross. I am. What else you want to talk about? Am I taking enough time? Too much time? Yes. Hi, what's your name? We met.
Penny.
Hi, Penny.
How are you? You sounded at the beginning like you were surprised that you turned out to be a writer. But your dad was a writer. And how much influence was that on you?
Well, it's here for years, Penny. I would deny any influence at all because it was really, I'm the Hank Jr., Hank III American Lip, and it's really hard to have the same name with someone in the same field because we all know you want to fly away from your parents and become who you're supposed to be when you're younger. And I would just balk at the question and I would say, no influence, zero. My father had zero influence. Because my mother raised me and I always felt she was ignored. I mean, even now, I had to go fix my tour page on the website, which my publisher wants me to have. And I saw a Wikipedia thing and it just said Father Andre Dubus. I thought, wasn't that interesting? I also had a mother. In fact, she raised me. The mothers get forgotten. But Penny, this is what I want to share. I love my father's writing, and I'm proud to be his son. He put the best part of himself into his work, and he was if you haven't read any short stories by Andre Dubus, you must, because he was a master and a beautiful, just literary artist, and his work's going to last for a long time. And And by the way, every time I publish a book, there's a spike in his book sales, which makes me feel really good. But here's the influence. I don't think there's any artistic influence because I didn't read. I didn't read him. I didn't read anybody. And we don't have a lot in common. A lot of his art, he was a deeply devout Catholic. He went to Mass 7 days a week. He would begin his day with a 7 a.m. Mass, then he would write. And he did that up until he was crippled in that car accident. And if you read his work, you cannot divorce the Catholicism from it. It's suffused his art. And I have no religion in mind, and so there's a big difference. But I will say this. Here's where his influence was profound, and I have to admit it. I have met so many people teaching at conferences and classes. I once met a woman who was 88 who had written a gorgeous novel. She started writing when she was 81. She published that book when she was 89. She died at 90. It got a rave review in the New York Times. And I said, can I ask you, why'd you wait so long to start writing? She said, oh, honey, I had to wait for my parents to die. She said, but they died 25 years ago, and it was worse. Now they're ghosts looking over my shoulder. She said, so I wrote it anyway. She said, also, I had a nun when I was 8 tell me that I wasn't creative, my sister was. And I believed her for 60 years. And then you hear these other stories where I meet these young people and their parents are crestfallen that they want to write poetry or play bass guitar or paint because parents don't want their kids to suffer. They want to have a job and an income. So a lot of people don't pursue that little voice. Here's the influence my father had on me. When he lived with us till I was about 9. I would see a grown man go into a room, shut the door, and we all had to be quiet because Dad was writing. And at a deep level, it went into my psyche that grown men write stories for people. And that it's completely fine to be a grown man who creates art. And in that, when I hit my early 20s and I knew that's the direction I was going in, I had no doubts. I didn't feel worthless. I didn't feel I was a loser for doing it because my father did it, and it felt as valid to me as law school, business school, medical school, and that's his lasting influence, and I'm very grateful for it. Yes, so I think one or two more. Hi, what's your name?
My name's Tim.
Hi, Tim.
I'm curious, you referenced the cave where you work. And I believe there was something in the Globe not too long ago describing this space, or you built it.
Yeah.
I'd like to know more about it, and also the time and place associated with your work. I mean, like trollops, do you carve out a certain amount of time every morning?
I do.
And
well,
how does that work for you?
I dug it in the side of a hill. It's got roots that get in my face sometimes. I did. All right, so this is funny, you guys. My brother designed this house. I was 45 before we owned a house. My parents never owned a house, so my whole life I had a landlord. So it was a big deal when I built my first home, and I was a carpenter for years. So my brother and I and a buddy built my house in Newbury for my family and my mother-in-law and father-in-law. They have an apartment in our house. And I forgot to build a writing room. It's a massive house. I mean, every kid has a bedroom. We got a massive this and that. And there's a dance studio for my wife's dance company. And, I'm getting the last. Someone says, hey, where's your writing room? I say, oh. So down in the basement, we had a really tall ceiling, just the way it was built. It was full of boxes. So I built these shelves, and then I built a loft across the shelf, and I framed it in, and it's a cave, man. It's 6 feet wide, 11 feet long. It's got a tiny port window I cover with a blanket, a desk, a blank wall, and then I write in front of it with a meat composition notebook and a Blackwing 602 pencil, which I sharpen with a razor blade from my carpentry apron. And I'm going to be doing that this afternoon. I normally write in the morning. There's a great line from Edna O'Brien, the Irish writer. She said, I like to write in the morning, she says, because that way I go from the dream world to the dream world. And I do find it's easier to not be thinking about bills and commitments and picking kids up and, all the things we have to juggle when I'm pretty close to having woken up. So what I do is I bring my youngest to high school, 2 oldest are in college now, and my wife goes off to the dance studio. I get my big dark roast black coffee. I go down the cave and I stay there for about 3.5 hours. And then around lunch, I go to the gym and I work out and clear my head, and I don't let myself think about the writing until the next day. And I do it 5 days a week, and every 3 or 4 years, there's a depressing little book for you. Dirty Love, on sale now. Should I take one more? Yes, hi, what's your name?
Sharon.
Hi, Sharon, we've met too,
Speaking
huh?
of depressing little, yes, several times. Speaking of depressing little books, can you talk a little bit about Dirty Love and how you came to write this collection of short stories? And it seems to me centered around Hampton, Salisbury.
That's it. Yeah. Well, a weird thing happened. So there are 4, publishers calling them novellas. I don't know what a novella is. A novella is just like a long short story or a short novel. I think they're actually noveliniettes. The longest one, Dirty Love, is 150 pages. That's really a novella, but they came in 4 different parts. The first one I wrote in 1999, and like 99.9% of everything I've ever written, it was the phoenix that rose from the ashes of what failed. I was writing a novel, and I wanted to write about this sexy kind of predator. Not like a violent predator, but the kind we've read about in the paper, kind of a con guy. And for 6 weeks I was working on this from this predator's point of view, and then I zeroed in on his first victim. And 25 years before this, I'm in Miami in the early 80s visiting my older sister. She's working in a bank. It's the 80s in Miami, so Don Johnson driving by with no socks. There's cocaine in the palm fronds. And I glance at this drive-through window, and it's an air-conditioned glass ball, and there's a very large woman sitting there doing the drive-by business. I looked at her for about a quarter of a second, pretty face. 25 years later, she shows up under my pencil as my first victim for my predator. And what happened was she became so much more alive than my predator that I let go of the predator. And I'm going to end with this. Well, I feel like I'm taking too much time. The other 3 came the same way. One more was also a failed attempt at the same novel, and a character who was a peripheral character in the novel that I was working on became more alive than my main character. And then the other 2 I wrote in the last couple of years, and it was my editor who pointed out, she said, you know they all kind of work in the same town, and 2 work in the same bank, and 2 work in the same restaurant? I said, really? I hadn't noticed that. Now I'm going to end with this. There's this really interesting thing that I think about writing happens. I think there's a difference between making it up on the one hand and imagining it on the other. That just because you want to write about this doesn't mean it wants to be written about by you. It's like, wanting your son to be an athlete, but he's a violinist. You can't make him a football player if he's a violinist. And if you try to, what's he going to do? He's going to walk away from you, right? And the same is true of characters in your dream world. Just because you want to write about A doesn't mean A wants to come, now or from you. But along the way, something else will come. And so I'm going to end with this. I think there's a difference between making it up on the one hand, imagining it on the other. And again, this whole thing that I love about writing is how it's this scary descent into the unknown, into the dream world. There's this wonderful line from, and I'm going to end with the ancient Chinese. I don't know who said it, some ancient Chinese poet. It said, we poets knock upon the silence for an answering music. Thank you, guys.